even if you know that you're in the right and you know that your opponents are wrong, maybe even you, not just wrong, maybe they genuinely are bigoted. Sometimes the experience of talking to them, of debating this with them, will help you better understand your own position. I was born in Kiev, what's now the Ukraine, at the time was Soviet Union, but really was the Russian Empire. My parents left and brought my brother and me to the US in 1975. I have a bachelor's degree in math computer science. I was a computer programmer for 12 years, basically from right before college to the end of law school. After law school, I clerked for Judge Alex Kaczynski, who is a federal judge on the Ninth Circuit. And then afterwards, I spent a year clerking for Justice Sandra O'Connor in the US Supreme Court. Healthy debate at universities requires three things. First, it requires legal protection for speech. That if the university can, for example, discipline students for expressing offensive views, that's very dangerous to free speech protections. Second, it requires a level of social tolerance. Let's say, for example, the university won't discipline students for expressing certain views, but say if you oppose abortion rights, or if you oppose race-based affirmative action, or if you oppose same-sex marriage, everyone calls you a racist or a sexist or a bigot, and you start worrying that even if professors say that they're going to treat you fairly, maybe they're not going to give you letters of recommendation or something like that. That's also bad for public debate. Unfortunately, a third thing that healthy debate at universities requires is some amount of politeness. That if people are constantly insulting each other, that's bad for public debate too. One thing that I think people should recognize, but sometimes don't, is even if you know that you're in the right and you know that your opponents are wrong, maybe even you, not just wrong, maybe they genuinely are bigoted. Sometimes the experience of talking to them, of debating this with them, will help you better understand your own position, will help you better formulate arguments that both persuade others and enlighten you yourself. And that's supposed to be a big part of the university experience. First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. When the framers talked about the freedom of speech or of the press, they were talking about some conception of the freedom of speech, but not necessarily freedom of every single instance of speech. People during the framing era recognized that there ought to be some restrictions on speech and on press, for example, for libel and slander, at least when we're talking about knowingly false statements about people that damage their reputations. Now, I think it should be very broad, should be very protective. I think the Supreme Court quite rightly developed a broad body of case law supporting broad free speech protection. But let's not put on rose-colored glasses. Throughout much of American history, there was a good deal of intolerance at a social level as well as legal level for free speech protections. One misconception that I think many people have is that the First Amendment applies to private institutions, private employers, private universities, private landlords, private internet service providers. Little kids think it applies to their mothers and fathers. Of course, the First Amendment starts with Congress. Congress shall make no law. So it applies to the federal government. It's been applied to state and local governments via the 14th Amendment. So the First Amendment doesn't actually apply to private institutions. Now, many private universities, I think quite rightly, recognize the importance of First Amendment values to debate in the university and specifically say, we will protect academic freedom, we will protect student free speech. And I think once they do that, then it's right to call them on it if they don't really respect free speech. In spring of 2002, I founded this blog, co-founded it with my brother, Sasha Volokh, who is now a law professor at Emory Law School. So it was originally the Volokh brothers, but very quickly we realized that to make it work, we needed to have more co-bloggers. And that's how we turned it into the Volokh Conspiracy. So the beautiful thing about a blog is you can write about whatever you're interested in. So my posts, for example, are mostly on First Amendment law, both on the free speech side and the religion side. Also some criminal law, some tort law, some intellectual property law, things I know pretty well. And the same can be said about most of my other co-bloggers. They have special areas of expertise, and they blog specifically, chiefly about those areas, but then occasionally they blog about other things. It's a mix of real expertise that I think many of our readers very much value, and a personal touch. What are the threats to free speech? There are many. One of them is the threat of violence. That's been especially visible, of course, in Europe, where there was the massacre at the Charlie Hebdo offices. But it's also been seen in some measure in the US, although fortunately a lot less so than in other places. That's a very perilous thing, especially since behavior that is rewarded is repeated. And there are other dangers as well. So for example, I've been writing and litigating recently about so-called criminal harassment laws. They are quite different from this workplace harassment or educational harassment. Rather, these are laws that impose criminal punishments for speech that is supposedly intended to annoy or offend people. But in recent years, what we have seen is that this criminal harassment law has shifted from restricting speech to people to restricting speech about people. So, for example, if somebody is posting things that harshly condemn a particular person or that insult a particular person, sometimes that person can get the speaker prosecuted. Likewise, sometimes they get injunctions. A court will order the speaker to take down all things that refer to this person. That, I think, is clearly unconstitutional. I've written a law review article on the subject that came out a couple of years ago. I've blogged about this quite heavily, and I've been litigating that recently as well. So I think that free speech is quite broadly protected and rightly protected. At the same time, that protection exists largely because people continue to be vigilant. Groups like the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, if it weren't for them, then I think there would be a lot more restrictions on speech at the universities, and probably a lot less really strong case law protecting free speech at universities. So I think it's important to stay worried, important to stay concerned, and important not to get complacent.